right, well, good evening, and we're so happy for Betsy to be able to share some more on parent level maturity and give us some insights and address some questions that people might have. So we're just going to get started right away. And Betsy, last month, the idea of empathetic listening was raised. And before we start in talking more specifically about parent maturity, could you give a little more insight on what empathetic listening is and how it is useful and relates perhaps to maturity?
Okay, so yeah, we're really big on empathetic listening at the Healing Center. In fact, we started our very first class that we taught was a class right here. I can show it. It's Listening for Heaven's Sake. Oh, I realize it's not going to show up on this screen. So Listening for Heaven's Sake was a class that we started with. And it's a bigger class than just teaching you empathetic listening. But one aspect of the class is it teaches you how to basically reflect back to someone so that they feel heard and seen and understood. And it's super important in all relationships, but especially with children, to learn how to reflect back what you're hearing, because a lot of times for them to feel heard and understood, even if they don't get what they want, it calms them down. There's something about our brain, our cingulate cortex, that's calmed down when we know that we're not alone. And there's some basic elements to the method that we teach. There's lots of different methods, but the elements that we teach is you always are tentative. So you start with saying something like, so, or am I hearing, or are you saying? The reason you want to do that is you don't want to sound like you're telling someone what they think. That can be offensive. And then the second element is you want to identify the feeling. And a lot of times people themselves have not identified their feeling. And even if they have, most people tend to be very general. They'll say like, I'm angry or I'm sad. And if you can use their body language and their facial expressions to deduce a much more precise word, then that actually helps them process what they're going through and decide, is this what I really feel? So an example might be the word anger, very, very common word in our culture. And so I could say, I'm really angry about this. And then if Christina is empathetically listening to me, she might look at my body language and my facial expression, my voice tone, and she might then choose the word irritated, because maybe it's not that strong. Or she might choose the word furious or livid, which are pretty strong versions of angry. And then that gives me the opportunity to decide, is the word I used more accurate? Is the word she used more accurate? Or is there a different word? So let's say she used the word furious, and I'm feeling pretty angry, but I wouldn't go that far. So then I might say, no, I'm not furious, but I am pretty upset. So what that does is it helps the person to process and explore what they're feeling. And it also helps the listener to understand what is going on for the person. And maybe I might say, I'm not actually angry. I'm just sad, or I'm confused, or I'm something else. But it helps the person own what they're feeling. And then the last element of the three elements, the tentative opening, naming the feeling. The last element is the situation. So what is it that has me so worked up? One example that we often toss around is, your dog just ate my best slippers. So that might be an example of something that would upset me. Or it could be that I don't feel like you're actually listening to me. I'm trying to talk to you and you're looking at your phone or you're looking at your watch, and it communicates to me that you don't really care about what I'm saying. So you also want to, if you can, identify the situation. And of course, mastering this skill, learning how to do it well, is something that takes some time and practice. And we teach the class, which was, this class was created by a ministry called Equipping Ministries International. They're in Cincinnati. And then they teach the class on a fairly regular basis, both in Cincinnati, and I think they're doing it online as well, as so many ministries are. So it's a really worthwhile skill to learn. One of our leaders has called it a superpower, because it really impacts your relationships if you learn to do it well. And I would say it's a really great skill for parents to have. with children, to be able to say to the child, am I hearing you say that you're upset because you didn't want to leave the party yet? What you're trying to do in brain terminology is you're trying to get the child's relational circuits on, because as long as their relational circuits are off, relational circuits being the wiring in your brain that has to do with relationships and not just tasks, not just getting things done. If you get the relational circuits on, then the bond that you have with your child should help them calm down. And then you have an opportunity to redirect them in some way. But the first thing is that people need to know that they're being heard and seen and understood and cared for. And it's only after that that you can then begin to redirect them. So I don't know if that's what the person who was asking was looking for, but that's it in short.
Thank you. I think that was a really good synopsis of the skill, giving us some understanding of it and the importance of it as we're in that parent maturity, or that parent stage, at least, whether or not we're actually mature in the parent stage. We're in the parent stage, how we can help our children. So thank you for that, Betsy. So while we're talking about that, let's move on to what is parent maturity stage? What does that look like?
Well, it's the fourth of 5 stages that the life model people have developed. So it's a pretty, what's the right word? It's a pretty high skill level to be at parent maturity. And of course, like all skills, there's a beginning to it where you're kind of learning it and getting the gist of it. And then over time and practice, you get more and more skilled at being a good parent. So nobody begins knowing everything. And of course, as we've been talking about in our previous episodes, we all start as infants. The main task there is to learn to receive. And so assuming that we learn to receive as infants, and that's kind of a big assumption, because I sure didn't learn to receive as an infant. I don't know about you all, but many of us have deficits there. And then we go into child maturity, and the main job there is to learn to take care of ourselves. And then the third stage is adult maturity. This begins at puberty. And once again, you're learning as you go. And adult maturity goes along. The main task of adult maturity is to learn to have good, healthy give and take in a relationship with a peer, someone who's at about your same maturity level. And so one of the big characteristics of adult maturity is that you're able to negotiate well. And when I say negotiate well, I'm not talking about getting a good deal for yourself. I'm talking about negotiating in a way where both people come away satisfying. So if you're at adult maturity, it shouldn't be satisfying to get your own way. Getting your own way, that's a childhood characteristic. Taking care of myself, me, I'm number one. So someone can be in an adult body, but still in childhood maturity, still really focused on getting their way. But adult maturity, you're actually wanting to give to the other person, and they are also giving back to you. So in our dream ideal world, we've learned to take care of ourselves, we've learned to receive, and we've learned how to be in an adult relationship with someone who's about our age and maturity, where there's give and take. And of course, even in adulthood, there is a progression. So we start learning how to do that with someone of the same sex, because from our point of view, that's going to be less complicated. They're going to share similar life experiences to us. And then we move into the opposite sex, which of course is more complicated. So in the ideal world, when we give birth to our first child, we have all these other things already in place, and we have life to give. We actually ideally have good relationships. We have, maybe if you're a woman, you have some good friendships with girlfriends, and you're there for them and they're there for you. And hopefully they're celebrating and supporting as you have your baby. And hopefully you also have a spouse, and your spouse also is, in our dream world, is mature and able to give. And that's really important, because babies are incredibly demanding, and they don't have any sense of their parents having limits. They just want, and you need a spouse. You're going to take two of you to really cover taking care of the baby. It doesn't mean the baby also gets everything that they want all the time, but it means that you're at peace about it because you know what it is to take care of yourself and to receive, and you know what your limits are, and you're able to navigate all that. But parent level is probably one of the most stretching in some ways, because you are now expected to give at a sacrificial level, because that baby cannot make it up to you. They can't give back. It's not like you kept me up last night, and so now I'm going to sleep in and you have to cook breakfast for your brothers and sisters. I don't think so. So it's a whole new world having to give sacrificially, and it's made much harder when we have earlier maturity deficits, which most of us do. I think kind of one of the tragedies of our time is that so many of us have experienced the pain of our own parents' lack of maturity. Like my dad had huge infant deficits, and that he was angry a fair amount of the time. And so then that was wounding to me. He wasn't reliably happy to be with me and able to regulate his emotions. And so then I have pain from that. And so I'm determined that I'm not going to be angry with my children the way my dad was with me. And of course, am I able to do that? Is my will strong enough to be able to say, I'm not going to be angry like my dad was? No, it's so sad. We end up acting in large part the way our parents did. But the good news is that God is really with us, and the Lord can bring great healing. And as I have over years healed in my relationship with my dad, I have become less and less like him and more able to give, and was, even in my father's case, able to give to him quite sacrificially during his last couple of years. And it was the sweetest moment probably when he said to me, "You're being so kind to me. Why are you being so kind to me?" And I was able to tell him, "Because I really love you." So we just want to cast vision for the fact that God is able to heal us, and that he views us with great tenderness and compassion. And that even though we have experienced the failures of parenting and sometimes feel a lot of anguish about our own behavior, God is with us in it. And he's able to not only heal us, he's able to heal our children. That was kind of a long intro.
Well, that was a great, I appreciate the vision that you were casting there, because we do experience some pain points as we become parents ourselves. Will you clarify for me, are we at parent maturity level by just becoming a parent? What does that look like?
Well, I think when you become a parent, you're beginning in that area. So you can't be more mature than the stage you are in life. Like you can't be an elder at age 20. I mean, not an elder in terms of elder maturity. So your first opportunity to begin parent maturity is when you become a parent, or when you become responsible for someone who's not able to give back to you. So that could be your own parent who is disabled in some way and really needing care. I noticed with my parents, they became more and more childlike as they got older. And so in some senses, I was in the position where I was parenting them. So it's not, you don't necessarily have to give birth to a child, but giving birth to a child is a great way to develop adult maturity, because you love them. So you're willing to do things for them you wouldn't do for others. And they really do demand it and require it of you. They demand more of you than you can possibly give. But the other tricky factor is, what level of maturity am I at? Well, if I've got 5 infant deficits and 3 childhood deficits and 6 adult deficits, am I at parent maturity. So maybe on my best days, but maybe not when I'm struggling. Maybe when I'm struggling, I start acting like a child, or maybe when my child defies me and overwhelms me, I fall back to childish behavior, and I'm trying to discipline them or parent them from a childish point of view. And of course, that doesn't really work. So I think the answer is always, in my opinion, to start with your lowest deficit, to start with your infant deficits. That's going to have the biggest impact, because a lot of infancy is learning to regulate your emotions. In fact, Dr. Alan Shore, the Einstein of psychiatry, has done so much work on development, says that the number one task of childhood is to learn to regulate your emotions. And Jim Wilder puts that regulation of emotions in the infant stage, the first 4 years of life. And so I just look back with some shame on many, many times when I got overwhelmed by life or my kids, and I dropped right down into infant maturity and would lose it and would be screaming at the kids and parenting them from an infant point of view. And I think, to be honest, there were moments when my children were more mature than I was. They were more able to calm down. I still remember my son one time saying to his little sister, like, Sarah, when she gets like this, just give in, and nothing else will work. So I was like, my children were being more rational about situations than I was at the time. So yeah, no, having a baby does not necessarily mean you're at parent maturity, but it means a window has opened for you to start working on some of those tasks. And if you're really finding them hard, the best thing is to go back and start working on the lower ones, because when you recover the lower ones, they actually seem to have a bigger impact. You can view it as a building. It's like, probably the most important aspect of any building is the foundation. So the foundational levels are probably the most important. In other words, if you have, say, 20 bricks missing from your foundation, but further up the building is beautiful, well, those 20 bricks are going to make a big difference. Whereas if your foundation is solid and then you start having some holes higher up, those are easier to recover from, if that makes sense.
It absolutely does. That's a good picture for that. So you mentioned the recover things that when you noticed that you were maybe not as mature as your children in the moment. What have you found to be helpful in helping you recover from some of these deficits?
Well, I think recovery from all infant deficits has to start in the same way. You assess your maturity, starting with the infant level. You find something that you actually think is doable. I mean, the great temptation is to want to work on something that's going to be really hard for you. Like for me, it would have been learning to regulate my anger, because that was such a big deal. And my dad was that way. And then his father, I found out in later years, talking to an aunt, his father was even worse. And so even though that seemed to me like the place to start, it was not the place to start, because I wasn't going to be able to do it. So you start with something you can do. It's a little bit like recovering from debt. I've talked about that before, that I like Dave Ramsey's debt snowball, where you pay off the lowest balance first, even though it may not be the most important balance. Maybe the most important debt is your mortgage, but you're going to pay off the money you bought on a whim to buy a new rug at Pottery Barn, and you financed it. You're going to pay that off first because you can pay it off. And then when you pay that off, then you take the $20 a month you were paying to Pottery Barn and you put it toward the car loan and you pay that off. So I recommend people look at the infant maturity thing, and maybe there's something you can do some of the time, but other times you become unglued. And then you decide that you're going to tackle that deficit, because if you can get that one resolved, then you will have so much more capacity, and you'll then be able to tackle the later ones. So you want to start with something that you can do. Now, the other thing that I don't know that I've talked about before, but we rarely change by direct effort. And Dallas Willard talks a lot about this in his books. For example, The Renovation of the Heart. We don't change by direct effort. We change by coming up with something we can do. And then we, like if I just say to myself, I don't want to be angry, so I'm not going to be angry anymore, then that typically won't work. But what kind of things can I do? Well, I can commit to when I do get angry, that I'm going to go lock myself in the bathroom and talk to Jesus until I've calmed down, rather than just letting the whole thing snowball. You're going to find, so I don't have a great example for how to do that, but you just keep, maybe you decide that in an argument, you are not going to always have the final word. So you're just going to not have the final word. And you keep practicing that. I'm not going to have the last word in this conversation. I'm going to let the other person have the last word. And that's fairly challenging. Well, as you work on that, you find that you no longer have to have the last word. And in fact, your ability to regulate your emotions has improved, because you have over and over again. Does this make any sense? Or another thing would be fasting is a great way, even if there's no way you could give up a whole meal. I could not give up a whole meal at this point in my life, but I can fast I eat like I have a little piece of chocolate once a day. And so I can give that up, even though it feels really hard. But you're doing something small to deny yourself. And pretty soon you discover that you actually have choice that you didn't used to have about what you're putting in your mouth. And I heard a story recently that I thought was super touching about an old man who started in May or so lifting these little weights, and then moved up to dumbbells. And his family was like, what are you doing? You're like this skinny little old guy, and you're like struggling to lift. But he had a vision of what he wanted to do. And when his granddaughter came over on Christmas Day, he swept her up and lifted her up so she could put a star on the Christmas tree. It's kind of my new favorite story. And so how did he get there? Well, he didn't get there by when his granddaughter would visit, trying to grab her and lift her over her head, because that wouldn't have worked. He started small and he worked up to it. So we start small and we work up to it, and we ask God for help. We ask him for his strategies, and we spend time with people who don't struggle with anger. We watch what they do when they're upset. It's often quite surprising to see what they do. And we learn by example, and we recover from our deficits, and we find then that parenting is more joyful and less struggle.
Thank you. I was just going to ask you about resources. So I heard you mention a couple. Would you like to expound a little more on that with relationships, I think, and time with God?
Oh, well, I think one of the best resources for time with God is the Emmanuel approach, just developed by Carl Lehman in the Chicago area. Carl is a psychiatrist, and I believe he may have done it in partnership with Jim Wilder of Life Model Works. And it's a pretty simple method where you pray a prayer for protection and quiet your body by deep breathing and yawning. And then you go to a positive memory, and you spend a little bit of time there that actually turns on the prefrontal cortex of your brain, where your relational circuits are. And then you listen to God. Now, we are doing this every day during the last half of Daily Connect. So every day, Monday through Friday, at this same Zoom link, we are doing Daily Connect from 2 to 3. And we do a number of things. We share our highs and lows with each other, and we read a passage of scripture. But from about 2:30 to 3, we're doing an Emmanuel time where we lead you through that. And that is absolutely invaluable, to do that literally over and over again until you have wired your brain to the point where you can connect to the Lord at will. I also have a YouTube video on the Emmanuel approach where I lead a session. It also gives a long biblical introduction, and for about the first, I'm guessing, 20 minutes, and then it leads the session. I've had some people tell me they've watched that video over 100 times. So yes, learning to have a very life-giving interaction with Jesus, where we can bring to him our joys and sorrows, our shame, and I think most importantly, from the parent maturity point of view, to be able to ask the Lord to show us how he sees our children. I remember at one point with one of my kids that I don't know how to describe it, but I really developed an attitude toward her. And I don't even think I was aware of it. It just, my vision of who she was pretty warped. And out of the blue one day, I don't even remember what I was doing, if I was praying, but I remember the Lord just said to me, you have developed quite an attitude toward your daughter. And then he said to me, I never do that to you, no matter how badly you behave. And I was really pierced. I mean, I was really, and I asked him to show me how he saw her, and he just showed me that she was really struggling. And her, snarkiness was not born out of like a desire to rebel, but just out of, I don't think she liked herself very well at that point in life. And she was really struggling. So it's important that we can see our children from the eyes, we say the eyes of heaven. We're talking about seeing our children the way God sees them.
Well, Betsy, that's a great encouragement and reminder to me as a parent to ask God how he sees my children. So that is
or my spouse or my friend that is driving me nuts.
Yeah, exactly. Now, what role would community play in helping us mature as parents? Is there a place for community?
Oh yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, the sad thing is, and this is really, I think, just a huge tragedy. And I've heard some people say it's the biggest problem in America. I mean, it's easy to be melodramatic, but I wonder if they're not right. And that is that in the culture that we currently have, very few people are even reaching, I should say, even reaching parent maturity. I've heard Jim Waters say that most men are only partway through childhood maturity, so still very focused on themselves. And most women have made it to adult maturity, so pretty good about being a good friend. They know how to have a good friendship. But how many people are actually at parent maturity and able to give sacrificially, which is what children really need. They need parents that delight in them. Now, of course, no one's going to do this 100% of the time, but I think it's good for us to have sort of a goal ahead of us, unless that's so overwhelming that, but that's really one of the things that draws us to God and to each other. So we need community. We need examples, healthy families that we can see, and we see how they handle things. There was a study that was done a number of years ago where they paired at-risk families with healthy families, and they found that both families became more healthy. I just found that so interesting. And of course, I don't think they really knew why, but they hypothesized that it made the healthy families look at what they're doing and say, oh yeah, that is what we're doing. That is helping. That does work. So they became more self-aware. And it obviously gave the at-risk families an example of a different way to do things. So we need examples. Sometimes it's an older woman in the church who's maybe widowed, who has life to give, whose grandchildren live far away, who's willing to step in. I'm always trying to encourage older people in the church to reach out to young families, because I think parenting kids, when you have a lot of young kids, is really, really hard, and that they need support. And yet somehow we don't seem to have a vision for that in our Western culture. We don't seem to have very many multi-generational families that we can look to. We don't seem to have many people as they get older helping out the families around them. I mean, one example I do have is my cousin out in California and his wife, who have been living for decades with their son and his wife and the 3 children. And it's so much fun to be in their home and see how they interact with each other. It's really wonderful. And the mom of the grandkids and the grandma really work well together. I mean, they're amazing. They work well together in raising these kids, and they're doing a beautiful job. I wish I saw more of that. Yeah, and I wish I lived closer to them so I could be around it more. But I'm not sure if I answered your question. I think I went all over the place.
No, you're good. You're good. And I love that. We were talking about community and how important that multi-generational, and what a great picture that is for what that could look like, and recovering maybe something that's been lost. So thank you. So Betsy, I noticed here it says if tasks are not completed, what could happen is begrudging the sacrifice required. And that makes me think that how important is our attitude in the things that we do and having that maturity level? Because sometimes I just think, does it matter how I feel about it as long as I do it?
Well, sometimes that's all you can do, and you do what you can and not what you can't. Jan Johnson always says that, and I really love it. She'll hold up something we should be doing, and then we're all grown, and she says, well, do what you can, not what you can't. So you do truly do what you can, not what you can't. But yes, it does matter, because babies don't realize they're asking so much, and they need to be received in joy, so that they develop a joyful identity and not a fearful identity. I think the thing that I've observed as I have matured more, still not fully mature, is that when you get mature, it's actually easy. And it's like, oh, this is what this is supposed to feel like. So I think it's kind of a diagnosis to notice, am I begrudging? Am I resentful? Now, this doesn't mean you can't say no. Your kid wants to be driven somewhere that's going to keep you up way past your bedtime. It's okay for you to say no. I can't do that. I'm really sorry. Maybe there's another mom and I can take you guys to the basketball game and she can bring you home. But right now, maybe there are younger siblings in the home. Maybe there's an elderly person that needs help. Maybe you're not completely well. Some parents are battling Lyme's disease or other issues. So it's okay to say no. And kids need to learn that life, you don't always get what you want. So this is not about giving your kids everything they want. But I do think when we do want to meet their needs and help them with their tasks so that they fully mature. And all of this, I know it's easy to wax poetic about the past, but I do think back in the time in history where parents were around their children more instead of commuting away, mom was in the kitchen, dad was in the barn or in the field. And parents had learned to do hard things and maybe received what they needed. At least the possibility that the transmission of maturity would happen easily and automatically was, I like to think, more likely. I know I've qualified that so many times, I probably made it ununderstandable. But, let's imagine you are fully mature. You had a wonderful childhood. And even though there was maybe suffering, maybe talking about bygone eras, maybe you developed polio as a kid and you now have a leg brace and you have some health issues, whatever. But you were beloved by your grandmother who lived in the house and rocked you and was a great comfort. Or maybe you had a pony or a pig that you could go to for consolation when you were little. So you might grow up with a fair amount of capacity. But in our world today, it's pretty rare to have loving grandparents around people are very busy trying to get ahead in life, trying to do all these things. And I think we underestimate the amount that children need and how hard it's going to be a parent. I remember when I was a geologist, some of my colleagues would travel like right at 2 weeks after they had a baby, they would be off doing something. And I would say, I'm not sure that's good for the baby. And they would be, oh, they'll be fine. I think we underestimate, what they need.
So it sounds like, based on what you just said, there would be real value. And the more you understand about the levels before parenting, understanding what's needed at infant, child. And because you've said that adult starts at 13, not like we traditionally think of like 18 or 21 or whatever. So one of the best things it sounds like we can give our children is to really understand what is required and what we can help instill in our children at an earlier age ourselves.
Well, it's really important to understand because it's very common for overwrought parents to expect too much from their children when they're really not capable. So I'll see parents trying to reason with their 2-year-old and I'll be like, they don't even have that part of the brain yet. They don't have much of a left hemisphere. So, they're trying to please, they're trying to understand. And then moms will say to me, oh, he understands. And I'll think, no, he doesn't. Not just what he understands is probably action and a few things, but it's so, to have our expectations be appropriate. But, as we're focusing today on parent maturity, I think the bottom line is our focus should always be on ourselves first. It's like the proverbial oxygen mask in the plane. So we want to not ignore the maturity task of our children, but it feels like if we can recover from our deficits, then what we have will flow automatically to our kids. Whereas if our focus is on helping them recover from what we don't even have, then it's just going to be an uphill battle the whole way, if that makes any sense. Now, having said that, I did do both. I mean, I didn't know about maturity when my kids were little, so they were all those boats had sailed, which made me sad. But what I did discover as I matured more, then even though they were out of the home, just in their interactions with me, it felt like it impacted them. And they would say to me, Mom, I've seen you change more in the last 10 years than I would have thought possible. So it should flow. The things that we have should flow naturally to them. And the things that we don't have will be very hard for them to have. So we got this way gradually as a culture. We became less and less mature as a nation. We spent more and more of our time on things that should not be as important, like getting ahead, and less time on relationships. And I've had a lot of older people tell me that they had no idea that they were needed. They felt like once they retired, this was their time to have leisure and play golf and go to the beach and travel. And I'm not trying to say people shouldn't go to the beach and travel. I look forward to those things too. But I remember one grandma saying to me, wow, I had no idea that I'm actually needed. I'm needed by my children to help parent. Now, of course, then if your kids are going to want you around, you have to learn to listen and you have to learn to not impose your way. So in other words, you have to become the kind of parent your kids want around, and there's no guarantees they still might not want you around because whatever. But there are people out there who do want help. And maybe I'm talking now about elder maturity, because parent maturity really centers on your family. your family, your parents, your work, your world. Whereas elder maturity is reaching out to people beyond that, reaching out to people in the community who are in need. So I'm getting ahead of myself, but I am trying to cast vision that older people can help in this regard, help in the task of parenting.
I think that's an important point, and something I was going to ask about is, does it have to be a relative of yours to get that? Because I noticed that there's one of the things that you need is having someone else to pour into you. I'd have to look a little further on this, but so elders can be anyone you can get who's more mature than you. It doesn't have to be your grandparent or some relative.
Yeah, now, yes, it doesn't have to be. And I'm just so aware too that not all relationships are going to be life-giving. And so, we've been working really hard at HCI for the last 18 years, trying to teach people how to listen, trying to teach them not to give advice that's unsolicited, trying to teach them how to listen well to people who are struggling and not feel like it's their job to rescue them. So it takes time to learn to develop the relationship skills that we all want to have, to be that person that is actually able to help other people. And it can be tricky, because I find sometimes as I start to get attached to a family, then I start becoming clingy, because the fact that I've formed an attachment to them makes it important to me. And I'm thinking in particular of a family I got really close to and was doing a lot with them. And then they were going to move. And I, of course, got excited about the thought, oh, maybe they'll move near us. And then they moved way beyond us, way out there. And then we went out there on a pretty regular basis for a while, but then Sam got sick and things got away from us. And so I feel like I'm throwing cold water on the whole idea. So I'm trying to say, I know it can be complicated, but I also think God can bring people together. And there are lots of people out there who are a little older who would probably love to come and rock a baby to sleep, or stir a pot of chili that's cooking, or help the little kids coming in from school, hang up their coats and sit and read. So I think it's worthwhile reaching out and trying to find people with whom you can form a relationship like that and spend time with. And many of us can think of people who were like that in our lives when our kids were little. My sister, who at the time was not married, she didn't marry until she was 50 years old, but she came and spent a lot of time with me and my kids when they were little. And of course, she has earned the title of favorite aunt ever since then, because they all bonded with her when they were really little, and they're still bonded with her.
So Betsy, would that be correct to say that is a way? Would it be correct to say it's a way that someone who doesn't have children could experience the growth that is parent maturity level?
I mean, I think yes, to some degree, though. How often does that person get up in the middle of the night and comfort the crying baby who has an earache? Or, there's it. The more that's required of you, the more that kind of stretches you, if that makes sense. And at first, it seems impossible. And then over time, it becomes more and more doable because you've been stretched in that regard. And that's why often baby number 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or however many is easier for mom and dad than baby number 1 was, because they didn't really know how to do it. So, but yeah, to the extent that you're giving sacrificially without expecting anything in return, then you are growing in that area. But I also found, caring for my parents, and I didn't care for them day after day the way I did my children, but I also found caring for my parents very stretching toward the end of their life.
Thank you. So Betsy, what I'd like to do now is I think I'm going to go through some of the indicators, and I'll just mention the indicator. And if you have any thoughts that you want to add onto the indicator. So the first one is I can give without needing to receive in return. Would you like to add any thoughts about that?
Well, I think we've covered that's, something that naturally flows when you're fully mature at that age. You want to give.
Right. All right. And so our next one is I make sacrifices in order to care for my children and family. So when I read that, I think I make sacrifices all the time. But is there like healthy boundaries I should be thinking about when I think about this? Or is it just make sacrifices?
Whether when a child is really little, they're really dependent on you, and you have to take care of them. It doesn't mean that you never get to sleep or you never get to eat. It doesn't mean that your life revolves around them, but it means that you're able to maybe defer your need for a moment, to take care of them. Like I worked full time when my first child was little. And when I would pick her up, she would see me and almost begin to shake because she was so hungry. And so I had to sit down in her daycare provider's home and breastfeed her right there. Because she, if I had gone out and tried to strap her into a car seat, once she saw me, and she apparently was just an absolute master at taking tiny sips from the bottle and waiting for mom to come along and feed her. And then I also had to get up in the middle of the night and feed her, because if I didn't, my milk would have dried up. But I mean, I didn't do it because my milk would dry up. I did it because she woke up hungry. She was basically taking her 8-hour period of not eating much, which should have fallen at nighttime. She was taking it during the day. So, but it didn't mean that I never got to eat. But in that moment, she's a vulnerable newborn, and I was away from her all day. And so I had to give sacrificially and take care of her needs first before I could settle down and eat something for myself, before I could even really put her in the car and then drive home and make a meal for myself and sit and eat. So, as children get older, if we're following the maturity things, they should be learning how to do hard things. They should be learning how to care for themselves. So a child, should be learning how to dress themselves and how to bathe themselves. Of course, you're starting by teaching them how to do it, but by the time they're done with childhood, they should have mastered those things. So you definitely have tasks that they are working on. And you also know how to receive, how to take care of yourself, and how to negotiate. And so it's kind of like all those things come up with a whole personality, a whole person that is then able to balance all those things. Does that make sense?
It does. I think as I listened to you thinking about even with the sacrifices, it sounded like you're saying, you make sacrifices to the level that is appropriate to what the need is.
Yep, that's right. And also, it's not like now that I'm a parent, my only task is to give sacrificially. I still have all the previous tasks, which now are easy because I've mastered them, but they're still there. I still have to do them. I still have to receive. I still have to take care of myself. I sound like a broken record probably, but it's those other tasks are still part of your life.
And it looks like some of the other indicators, like delaying gratification of my immediate needs, is what you mentioned about. I may have to just wait for the moment, but that doesn't mean I'm waiting forever. Mm-hmm. That willingness to delay. Mm-hmm. And then the cheerfully serving my family plays into that motivation we talked about earlier.
And don't forget, in the ideal family, there's a husband and a wife, and they already have a relationship that's healthy, that is based on mutual satisfaction and being able to negotiate. And so they're able to negotiate. They're able to say, I had a terrible day, and can you take care of this while I do that, or while I go on a run? So that's also, this is how, as we become more mature, our lives truly do become more complicated, but we become more adept at juggling all the complexity.
Right. And so one last one of the indicators that I would love a little more clarification or some examples on is that I synchronize with my needs with the needs of my children, spouse, work, and church.
Well, that again is the whole idea of synchronizing. Like when you think about synchronizing time, you're setting clocks to all the same time. And this is the idea that you're synchronizing the needs of everyone, not ignoring anyone. But one thing I would like to say is that I do think your wife or your husband and your children, they really do need to come first, your family, maybe your parents. And when I was on staff at my church, I would see the pastor asking parents of young children to say, for example, serve on vestry. Now, it's really not my business in a way what people do, but I would say to him sometimes, don't do that. Don't ask them to serve on a group that, at least at that time, would sometimes meet till 10 or 11 o'clock at night. I said, those men and women need to be ministering to their children. Their children will only be young for a short time. Don't ask them to do that. But he would say to me, well, they're my best people, or they're really capable. I really need them. And I don't know. I never said it to him, but I always felt kind of like, you don't need them as much as their family needs them. And so I do think when your kids are little, and this is just my opinion, but I do think the main focus has to be the main focus. Maybe that's not the time to add some extra thing. And, my husband's very friendly and gregarious and outgoing. And he at one point had a commitment almost every night of the week. And the kids would be like, where's dad? Well, he's out again. And I finally said to him, your kids are asking where you are. And we negotiated, once again, this is negotiating, but we negotiated an agreement that we were only going to be out one night a week. And it was going to be together as a husband and wife that one night. So we ended up, committing ourselves to a home group, a small group, and we attended that. And we didn't do other things. I think the church needs to help parents with the huge task that is parenting by not asking them to do all kinds of other things. This is where older people who are still able to, lots of people are retiring now at 65, and I'm 67, or I will be in a few weeks, 66. So we need to step in and fill some of those gaps so that, children long to be with their parents, especially if the parent is away all day working. They long to see their parent, and we don't want the parent to come home and have dinner and then go right back out again. But that, again, is just my humble opinion. So to me, to synchronize all those different things means you're synchronizing all the needs of your work, your home, your family, and your church. You're able to do something, but maybe not do the things that are really demanding.
Thank you. That helps.
Mm-hmm.
So Betsy, we're about out of time. Is there anything else that you would like to share that's on your heart with this idea of parent maturity?
Well, I think the one thing I really want to share is that parenting is very challenging, and that there's a lot of fear that I hear from people that they're messing up their kids. And I just want them to know that, yeah, we all make mistakes as parents, and God is bigger than all that, that he can bring healing, and that the Lord is with you. in your parenting, and there is healing, there's help, and reach out for help if you need help. And I just want parents to not be living in fear that they're muffing it up and they feel helpless and don't know what to do.
Thank you. Wow, that is such a good word.
Mhm.
So much appreciate you sharing tonight on parent maturity. And the only thing I'd like to add before I finish the recording is that if Betsy earlier mentioned Daily Connect, and that you can join us in experiencing the manual prayer and community. And to do that, you can go to the HCI website, which is godhealstoday.org, and you'll find a link from there under Connect. So just wanted to make sure that people knew that that was available to them as a great resource. So thank you so much, Betsy, for sharing tonight.
You're welcome.